My grandfather was about to give me everything. In the inheritance, I'm talking the house, I'm talking the business, I'm talking I'm gonna be CEO. And then he found out that I'm not really the rightful heir. Let me explain, but it all has something to do with my evil grandmother. Have you thought that someone close to you would try backstabbing you? And not just anybody close, but specifically a family member? Well, life is just full of surprises. This is going to be a lengthy read, but I swear it's worth it. Also, this is a throwaway account because I don't just want anyone coming back to me, but I did want you guys' comments and opinions on my situation. So, let me go ahead and give you some context first. I'm 25 female and I lost my parents 10 years ago. It was a terrible, terrible car accident and I still have not properly healed from the accident. But rather, I just learned to live and cope. However, my grandfather Jeffrey has been my biggest support and comfort. He and grandmother became my legal guardians when my parents passed away. My father had written his will that if anything happened to him or my mom, he wanted grandfather to have custody of me, and I'm glad that he chose my grandfather. I've always had a very great relationship with my grandpa. Even after my parents passed away, you see, Grandpa only had sons and my father was the only one of his siblings to have a girl. So my grandfather has always had a soft spot for me. Unlike my grandmother, she's always treated me differently from my cousins who are boys. It never bothered me because I just thought that she favored her granddaughter from her previous marriage. So before my grandmother met my grandfather, she was married to this man called Matthew who was her childhood sweetheart. They grew up together and got married immediately after high school because my grandmother fell pregnant with her oldest child. Unfortunately, the marriage did not last for reasons only known to them. She then met my grandfather and had 3 sons with him. I've just always found it weird how my father was her so-called favorite, yet she's never liked me that much and I'm his only child, but I guess her fate for my mother was that strong. A part had hope that our relationship would get better and improve once I moved in with them, but it seemed like it only made things worse. A few years after my parents' accident, my grandmother would always bring up the fact that I looked nothing like my father or his side of the family at family events. She would specifically do it when family members were around. She would bring up the fact that all my cousins had dark hair like her, and my grandfather, while I was blonde. She would also mention that none of my dad's side of the family had green eyes like me. So basically, she was questioning my paternity, and I never understood why. Just to clear things up for you guys a bit, I am my mother's photocopy. I inherited all her features, and she was also blonde with green eyes. I would tell my grandmother countless times that I just inherited my looks from my mom's side, but she would just frown and roll her eyes at me. Anyways, I lived with them for a few years, except for the years I was at university. My grandmother fought so hard for my grandfather to not pay for my fees, but luckily I was awarded a full all-expenses-paid scholarship and became my parents, well, they were financially smart. They also left me money enough to get by in life. I studied marketing just like my grandfather had, and once I graduated, he offered me a job at his agency, which angered my grandma because, he didn't really care though. He felt that I had worked hard for it, which I did. I mean, I was the top student in my class and my final average was excellent. So, I've been working for my grandfather for about almost 5 years, and my cousin Jake also works there. My uncle works there too, but they do more freelance work for my grandfather. My grandmother has been nagging my grandpa to hire her granddaughter Amanda, but he's been refusing because she doesn't have a qualification, and she was also studying marketing but then dropped out to focus on her influencer career, which angered my grandmother a lot. Anyways, let me not bore you guys with too many back details. I was at work busy drafting a proposal for a client when my grandfather walked in with a huge smile upon his face. We greeted each other. He then asked how was my proposal going, and I told him that it's going well. He reminded me that this was a major client, and I won't lie, whenever he reminds me that this was a big client, I got even more nervous. My grandfather could sense my nerves and then proceed to hold my hand and tell me that he knew that I would kill this presentation. He told me that he believed in me and that he would not have assigned this client to me if he wasn't sure of my capabilities. I gave him a little smile and told him that I would not let him down. He then proceeded to tell me about the birthday celebration he was throwing next weekend. Yeah, he was turning 70, yet he was still fit and healthy. For most of the morning, we spoke about his birthday celebration. And from what he was telling me, it sounded like it was definitely going to be a big event. My grandfather loved throwing big parties. He believed that everything needed to be celebrated, so I wasn't surprised that he was making his 70th birthday a huge celebration. A few days later, I had presented my proposal to the major client. The client loved everything about my proposal and wanted to sign the contract immediately. I was so proud of myself. I just landed a major client for the company, and I've done it all on my own. I knew that my parents were looking down smiling at me because I knew that I had made them proud. Everyone at work was congratulating me. Later that day, my phone started beeping and my grandmother's number popped up on my notifications. It shocked me because she had hardly ever texted or called me. I opened her text and it was a message of congratulations, which did surprise me. I was actually taken back because she hardly ever acknowledged my accomplishments. She even told me that she was proud of me and that she loved me, which I found really weird. But it warmed my heart because it felt good to hear such kind words from my grandma. I wish I had not been so naive, because then I would not have ended up in the messed up situation that I'm in. I'll update you guys about it. What's up, everybody? Mr. Reddito here. I hope you're enjoying your day. If you're not subscribed to the channel, take a second and hit that subscribe button. We do have multiple updates to get into, and this story is about to take a wild ride. Here's your first update. Update number 1. It was finally the day of grandfather's 70th birthday, and he was hosting it at his house. Jake and I arrived together because we had agreed to use his car. The yard was decorated so beautifully and the food looked absolutely delicious, and I thought it was going to be a barbecue, but I guess he decided on something different. We found him busy talking to his friends and he looked so happy, which warmed my heart. I then noticed that my grandmother's granddaughter Amanda was around. I went to greet her and she greeted me back with a huge smile. She was busy on her phone and I asked what she was up to. She told me that she was doing a vlog. I then asked her how that was going, and she told me that it was going really well, that her following had increased tremendously, meaning that she was making quite a bit of money. I told her that sounded exciting, that she should send me a link so that I could follow her too. As she was about to reply, my grandmother interrupted us. She greeted me and then gave me a hug, which was odd because she was not an affectionate person. Even Amanda was a bit confused by her hugging me. She asked what were we up to. I just told her that Amanda was just telling me about her vlogging career. My grandmother frowned and then quickly smiled as my grandfather joined into the conversation. We greeted each other and then wished him a happy birthday. He thanked me and then proceeded to ask what we were talking about. As I was about to respond, my grandmother cut me off and told him that we were talking about Amanda's plans to go back to college. Amanda raised her eyebrow and I looked over my shoulder. My grandfather's eyes lit up because he was a very big person on education and believed that in order for you to be successful in this lifetime, you need qualifications. He told Amanda that he was happy to hear that she was going back to college. As Amanda was about to correct him, my grandmother interrupted and said that she was super proud of Amanda, and she hoped that once she graduated, my grandfather would have a job for her. So, my grandfather nervously laughed and told us that he had a big announcement to make. My grandmother looked at him weirdly and asked him what was the big announcement about. Grandfather ignored her and just walked off. My grandmother then asked me if I knew anything about this announcement, and I shrugged my shoulders and told her that I had no idea what this announcement was about. As she was about to ask another question, my grandfather was in the middle of the yard with a microphone, asking for our attention. Everybody turned around to face him, and we all moved close to him so that he would be able to hear him. He started off his speech by thanking everybody for coming to celebrate his special, that he was grateful that he had lived for this and that it was a blessing. He then spoke about my parents, specifically my father. He spoke about how he wished that my father could be there, but unfortunately everybody was really on borrowed time. I felt tears rolling down my cheeks and Jake immediately held my hand, whispering that my parents are super proud and I should never forget that. I gave him a little smile and slightly nodded my head in agreement. My grandfather continued with his speech, and then he said that he had huge news, The news that came out of his mouth, it was really shocking. My grandfather announced that he would be stepping down from the CEO in just a few months because he was just too old to be walking up and down corridors, and that he wanted to spend his last years relaxing because he has been working hard for his whole life. My uncle yelled that he was happy that my grandmother was finally taking a break. He then announced that he wanted me to take over for him, but under both my uncle's supervision. I was shocked but extremely happy. I could not believe that my grandfather was leaving his company and his legacy to me. He then continued to say that since he was trusting me with his legacy, it was only fair that he appointed me as the head of his estate, meaning that when he passed away, everything of his would go to me. I couldn't believe my ears. He was trusting and leaving everything to me, and Jake looked at me and asked how I was feeling. I told him that I was in shock. He just hugged me and told me that I deserved it. So I smiled at him, and I knew that this could possibly cause my other cousins to be envious and also hate me, but I didn't care. My grandfather continued to explain that he wanted the company to stay within the family, because it was a family business after all, and since I was his only granddaughter, he thought that it would be best to leave everything to me. The celebration continued, and everybody was congratulating me. Well, everybody except for my other male cousins. They were just rolling their eyes at me and throwing daggers. I was overwhelmed and extremely happy. My grandmother came up to me and gave me a big hug. She told me that she was happy for me and that my grandfather had made an excellent choice and decision, which really surprised me, guys. She asked if we could quickly have a private conversation inside. So I nodded my head and we went inside. So I took a seat and she poured us both glasses of wine. She then took her seat and gulped down a bit of it, and she looked into my eyes and held my hands. She told me that she wanted to apologize for how she had treated me for all these years. She continued to say that it was never her intention to make me feel unwanted, but that once my father passed away, it was hard for her to even look at me, because I reminded her so much of him. I was shocked to hear her say that, because she always made comments about me not looking like my father. She continued to say that she wanted us to work on our relationship, because she knew how much it would mean to me and my grandfather, and that this was something my father probably wanted to see. She was right. My father had always wanted my grandmother and I to have a close relationship since she never got along with my mom. I also knew that this would make my grandfather very happy. I told her that I would love for us to work on our relationship. However, I told her that before we could start over, I need to know why she hated my mother so much. My grandma took a deep breath and told me that she never hated my mother, but rather she was just jealous of her because she had taken her little boy from her. She chuckled a bit and told me that I would understand once I had children of my own. I just nodded my head and told her, okay, I understand. I mean, my father was the last born, and as a baby he was very sickly, so it made sense why she was so overprotective of him. She told me that she would probably head back outside. So I nodded my head and stood up. She then asked if she could come over to my place tomorrow for our first bonding day, even adding that she would cook us a yummy lunch, which I could not say no to because one thing about grandmother, she can cook. Wow, how I wished I would have said no to that lunch. I wish I would have, because after lunch everything went straight downhill. Update number 2. Hey guys, I'm back for another update. My grandmother has just arrived at my house, which she was carrying plastic bags of food. I helped her carry them into the kitchen, and then she started setting things up. She unpacked everything in the plastics and started to cook. I asked if she needed help, and she took her head. She told me that this was her treat and that she just wanted me to relax. She then added that I should enjoy relaxing because once I take over the company, she won't exist anymore. Well, I won't be able to relax when I take over the company? I smiled at her because she was right. Being a CEO was definitely not child's play. I was busy reading a magazine while she was cooking. After an hour, she rushes into the living room. She looked frustrated and asked what was wrong, and she told me that she's forgotten to buy us wine. I told her that I had a few bottles of wine in my cupboard. She told me that she also needed this very specific wine to add to the meal that she was cooking. She then asked if I could quickly go to the store and get it, so I agreed to go get it. I quickly changed my outfit and I headed out to the store. I took about 30 minutes and managed to get the wine with also a very few other amount of things. When I got home, my grandmother was not in the kitchen. As I was about to look for her, she walked in there. She smiled as I told her I got the wine, and she thanked me and told me that I would love this wine. She finished cooking and we had our lunch outside on the patio. While we were eating, she told me that I've done such a good job taking care of my parents' home. My parents had obviously left me their house, and I've been living here since I graduated. We continued eating and talking, and she was telling me stories about my father as a child. Honestly, hearing these stories warmed my heart. I felt close to my grandmother, and I felt even closer to my father. As she was about to leave, I thanked her for coming over, and she told me that it was her pleasure and that we should do this more often. I smiled at her and told her that I would love that. I was busy telling Jake about my lunch date with our grandmother. I told him that things were finally looking up between us. He told me that he was very suspicious about her actions, and he told me that he found it weird that she was being all nice to me after my grandfather had announced that, well, I'm the head of the estate. He told me that I should tread very, very lightly around her, and that I should not trust her intentions because he felt that she had ill intentions in mind. I snapped and told him that he should keep his negativity to himself, and I told him to stop being jealous and hung up the phone. A few weeks go by, and I have not spoken to Jake since that day. But alas, my grandmother was ignoring my calls and messages. I thought that maybe she was busy. Anyways, it was the day of my grandfather announcing to everybody at the company that he was appointing me as the CEO. The media was there also because the company was one of the biggest companies in the States. I was busy socializing when I saw grandmother busy talking to a few ladies. I walked over to greet her. She rolled her eyes at me while she greeted me back, and she continued talking to the ladies, intentionally ignoring me. I was so confused. I was about to ask her what's up. But my grandfather called me over because he was about to make the announcement. Everybody was taking their seats, and grandfather was facing everyone. As he was about to make the announcement, my grandmother stood up and said that she had an announcement of her own. My grandfather looked at her annoyingly, but he allowed her to continue talking. She took a few pages out of her purse, and what she said next completely embarrassed and destroyed me. In front of everybody, she announced that I was not their biological grandchild, that my mother had an affair while she was married to my dad. She explained that the papers were from my mother's personal journal. She then also took a document out. She further explained that she had secretly done a DNA test by using a strand of my hair, and the test indicated that we are not related. My heart shattered into a million pieces because I could not believe that she was doing this to me in front of everyone. I looked at my grandfather, who snatched the DNA test from Grandma. He was scanning everything, and I could see the hurt in his eyes. I walked over to him and told him that this was all a lie. He shook his head and said that the DNA test clearly stated that I was not his grandchild. I told him that all of this was a lie and that we could go to a real DNA place right now. He shook his head, tears rolling down my face. My grandmother looked at me with disgust and told me that she always knew that my mother was a loose woman with no morals or values, and she called my dead mother all sorts of horrifying names, insulting her, and my grandfather did absolutely nothing. Jake came to my defense and told my grandmother to shut her mouth. She rolled her eyes, but she kept quiet. My grandfather looked at me and told me that I was fired and that I should never ever come back here, so I glared at him in disbelief and asked if he was being serious. He nodded his head and asked for me to leave, and that if I did not leave willingly, he would then have no choice but to call security. Jake told him that he should at least let me pack up my things. I shook my head and said that I did not need anything from here. I looked at my grandparents one last time and I walked out. My heart was hurting, and I've never felt so hurt and betrayed. My grandfather did not even defend me. He just threw me out like garbage, and that old woman had the nerve to call my mother such names. She was going to pay. They were all going to pay. Update number 3. Hey guys, I know it's been weeks since the awful day that I've been talking about. Well, yeah, I've been taking it day by day. My grandfather had really fired and cut me off. The whole incident was on the front page of the business news that day, and I was embarrassed. Even though I was hurt by my grandparents' actions, specifically Grandma, I was not going to let them get away with this. They'd tarnished my late mother's name, and they were going to pay. Jake was keeping me updated on everything that was going on in the company. He told me that Amanda has been hired to replace me. I was devastated and hurt to hear. I was in my parents' room going through their stuff when I found my mom's journal, the one that my grandmother ripped the pages from. There was absolutely no way my mother would have cheated on my father, and what I found very strange, I found her journal hidden in the bathroom cabinet, not inside one of the boxes. I read through her journal, and what I discovered, guys, it rocked my world. I knew my mother would have never cheated on my dad. It looked like my grandmother was the one cheating on my grandfather with her ex-husband. My mother had written that she saw them at this very secluded restaurant and that they were all over each other. She also wrote that she was conflicted about whether to tell my father or not, but the rest of the pages were ripped out. The old lady ripped out certain pages to give the illusion that my mother has been cheating. So, I called Jake and asked him to do something for me. I told him that he must do it discreetly and make sure that no one catches him. He agreed, and a few days later came to my house with the information I needed. I'd asked to get our grandmother's ex-husband's address, which he got from Amanda. One thing about Amanda was that she was a bit slow and never caught on to anything, hence why it's been so easy for Jake to get the information. We drove to Matthew's home, and luckily we found him there. He had no idea who we were, which I did find strange. I explained who we were, and he was taken aback. He told us that he had not seen our grandmother for a few weeks. He exposed that they were seeing each other romantically, of course. He then asked us when would the separation between her and our grandfather be finalized. I just raised my eyebrow and asked him what separation was. He told us that our grandmother had told him that she was going to leave our grandfather as soon as he hired Amanda. He told us that they've been seeing each other again for over a year now. Jake told him that our grandparents were not divorcing. He laughed and said obviously they cannot divorce. She was still legally married to him. Jake and I gasped in shock. He explained to us that our grandmother never wanted to sign divorce papers. She had told him that she was going to use grandfather for his money and that once she got close enough, she would steal his fortune. He then further explained that the plan fell through when she, unfortunately, fell pregnant. He also told us that for all these years, she's been secretly stealing money from our grandfather. I looked at him and asked him to back up the claims that he was making. He stood up and went to collect a few documents, and he showed us their marriage certificate, and indeed they were still married. He also showed us a bank statement that indicated that money was being sent into his account from our grandfather's account. We noticed that the most recent transactions were coming from the company's account. So we asked him about that, and he said that it was Amanda's doing. I could not believe my ears. I then asked him why he was confidently telling us all this, and he told us that he was tired of being a side piece. His words. He further explained that it was clear that my grandmother was lying to both him and Grandpa, and he honestly was getting sick of it. He also added that if grandfather's accountants picked up on this, they would accuse him of fraud, and he doesn't think my grandmother would even help him out. It was clear that Matthew had realized that he was just being used, and he was tired of it. I proceeded to ask if he would do me a favor, and he said he would do anything to take my grandmother down. He explained to us that she was the reason why he had no relationship with both his daughter and granddaughter. He further explained that she's been manipulating all of them, and that they were all part of her web of lies. So I asked him why hadn't he tried reaching out to grandfather. He told us that the chance of grandfather believing him was slim to none, and he would just end up getting all the heat of it. I nodded my head and told him that I understand where he was coming from. He then proceeded to tell Matthew our plan. A few days have passed, and I was at the venue where my grandmother was hosting a charity event. I walked into the event, and everybody was shocked to see me. My grandfather looked away, and grandmother immediately rushed over to me. She told me that if I did not leave immediately, she would have security escort me out. So I chuckled and told her that would be a bad idea. As she was about to call security, Matthew walked in with Jake, and she absolutely froze. Matthew rushed over to her, and he was calling her all sorts of romantic pet names. My grandmother had no idea how to act, so my grandfather asked what the hell's going on. As my grandmother was about to respond, I told him that I would gladly explain everything to him. So I proceeded to tell everyone, because everybody was watching, even the media, that my grandmother has been having an on and off affair with her ex-husband. Everybody was shocked. My grandmother yelled for me to shut up and stop lying. However, Matthew backed up my statement and confirmed that they've been seeing each other romantically. I took out the bank statements and Matthew had shown and gave me. I gave them to my grandfather and told him that Grandma's been stealing money from him and sending it to Matthew's account. Matthew told Grandfather that my grandmother had told him that this money was going to be used when she left him stuff, and he added that my grandmother had told him that this money would have them set until the day that they pass on. I could see my grandfather's anger brewing. I then told him that my grandma was still married to Matthew even, meaning that their marriage was not even existent. Matthew explained that my grandma refused to sign the divorce papers and his marriage certificate with my grandma was fake. He added that grandmother had hired someone to draft a fake marriage certificate. Matthew kept on exposing Grandma and all her evil tactics. My grandmother looked at Grandfather and asked him not to believe me or Matthew. She reminded him that I was not even my father's biological child. I laughed and laughed and laughed, and then I proceeded to take out my own DNA test. I showed it to him, and it indicated that Jake and I were related. Matthew then exposed that my grandmother had asked him to draft a fake DNA result. My grandfather looked at me and I could see the sadness and regret in his eyes. My grandma rushed towards me and proceeded to slap me. She was about to slap me again, but Grandfather grabbed her arm and told her that he was going to call the police. She starts screaming at me. She called me all sorts of insults, and out of anger, she confessed to everything. She even confessed that she has gone through my mother's journal and even ripped out the pages. My grandfather was trying his best to pull her away from me, but she was so strong. Jake had to help. She yelled that she had always hated my mother because she had threatened to expose the affair. She then exposed that the only reason she even went to my house was so that she could find something to use to destroy my relationship with my grandfather because she hated how close we were. She yelled that my grandfather should have appointed her as the head of his estate because she was the reason he was even rich. Someone had called security and they were walking over to Grandma. As soon as she saw the security guard, she back-kicked Jake in the stomach like a mule, and he immediately let her go. She tried running, but she was just too slow. She was screaming and cussing as they escorted her out, and everybody was in disbelief about what just happened. Final update. A couple of months have passed since the day Grandma went crazy, and a lot of healing has gone on. Firstly, my grandfather kicked my grandmother out and broke up with her technically. He couldn't really divorce her because she was never married to him. Matthew has been telling the truth because my grandfather went to court to verify the information. The court told him that there's no document with their names on it, meaning that grandmother had never filed a marriage certificate. He could not understand how grandmother has gotten away with this, but as we all discovered, Grandma was one smart, manipulative cookie. Well, after the charity event, Amanda admitted to my grandfather that our grandma had forced her to steal money from the company, and that was the main reason why she had always wanted Amanda to work there, so that she could steal more money. My grandfather decided to be lenient towards Amanda because of all her honesty. Also, we have no idea where my grandmother is. Once the security escorted her out, she, poof, disappeared. Even Matthew had no idea where she was, which was frustrating for him because he was now unable to divorce her. Unfortunately, my relationship with Grandfather is still a bit strained, but we're working on it. He really broke my trust, and most importantly, he broke my heart when he did not defend me, and I was still trying to get over the fact that instead of trying to figure things out with me, he had immediately fired and cut me out, which hurt tremendously. He did ask me to come back to the company and take the CEO position, but I rejected it. Told him to give it to one of my uncles. The whole situation, it just inspired me to start my own marketing agency. I decided that I wanted to have my own legacy. Jake also decided to leave my grandfather's company and work for me instead. Sometimes I regret taking the action of revenge, because it revealed so much and it's brought a lot of hurt. However, at the same time, it brought out the truth. Even though my intentions were evil because I had wanted to cause pain to my grandma, It did bring a lot of peace because everyone found out the truth and now we aren't living in grandmother's lies anymore. So it just blows my mind that somebody can be so diabolical and just set on taking over somebody's life like the grandma in today's story was. I do want to know your thoughts about it. Say, for instance, you were in OP's position, and you were having to deal with these allegations and all this false narratives and everything that was bad that they were saying about your late parents. I mean, this was a lot to handle. Guys, drop it down below in the comment section what exactly you would do. My name's Mr. Reddito. I narrate stories like this every single day. If you guys want to be a part of these stories, consider subscribing. I hope you did enjoy it. And for more stories, like I said, hit that subscribe button. Check out the other channels down below. Guys, have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow. And of course, remember, it's cool to be kind. See ya.